go. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome all. It is so great to see folks. Welcome, welcome. It is great to see you all. Just giving folks a minute to connect to audio. Thank you for joining us. All right, looks like we have most folks connected to audio. Thank you for joining us. It's great to see you all for this webinar related to the Unrealized Impact 2.0 report. We are so excited to dive in today to talking about promising practices. I'm going to do a little introduction and kind of framing here at the top before we jump in. If anyone is looking for Spanish interpretation, we do have that available throughout our time today. You're just going to head over to the Zoom menu, look for the globe icon, and then click on it to change the language, and that way you can access it throughout our session. So we do our intros at Promise 54 just a little bit differently than maybe some of us have been socialized to do intros out there. We try to do our intros in a way that is what we call radically human. And what we mean by that is that as opposed to centering our credentials or our degrees or networks that we're a part of, what we decide to center is in fact whatever truly matters to us. So it could include some of those things if they're really meaningfully important to us, but it could include completely different things as well, and it can change day to day or moment to moment. So I'm going to introduce myself first in my own radically human way to kick us off. So I'm Xiomara. It's lovely to meet anyone I'm meeting again today for the first time. It's great to see a number of familiar faces as well. My pronouns are she and her. I identify in lots of ways, including as a cisgender, able-bodied, Latina, queer, woman, a daughter, a little sister, a titi, a mother, and an aspiring warrior for racial justice. My Roman Catholic Puerto Rican mom, who grew up low income in the South Bronx and is there on the upper left of that slide there, met my Muslim first generation immigrant dad from Bombay, India, in college. They fell madly in love with one another, and together, both first generation in each side of the family to graduate from college, they supported each other through undergrad, through master's degrees, and ultimately through their PhDs. And together, with each other and through education, they broke the intergenerational cycle of poverty for our family. Their experiences informed my passion around educational equity and brought me to this work. I also grew up in my house watching them form connection across lots of lines of difference, many of the ones you could possibly imagine, from spices to food to rhythms and music and language, religion, and so much more. And for them, that learning about one another, finding connection, and building deep relationship in that was a big part of their definition of love. And today, it really informs a lot of my approach to building radically human spaces where people can bring as much of themselves as they're willing to generously share. And in so doing, hopefully find safety across lines of difference and ultimately be positioned to thrive as individuals and as collectives. A little bit more about me. I am a wife to an amazing woman who I've been with for 21 years. We have been illegally married for 9 years. We have been legally married for 4 years. I am a mother to a kind, brave, smart 9-year-old, now 4th grader. And we approach every day as parents with her attempting to equip this kiddo to navigate a racist society as both a responsible, white-presenting human and a grounded, confident, multi-ethnic adult one day. I'm also the super proud founder and CEO of Promise 54. I'll tell you a little bit about our organization. If anyone's meeting our organization for the first time today, we're a national nonprofit, and we exist to help other organizations create environments where your adults can truly thrive. Because we believe that that is a precondition for social justice, and that's what we're all working toward here. We do our work in a number of different ways. We partner up with organizations in one-on-one tailored support relationships and help organizations to move their work forward from wherever they're starting at the intersection of talent and culture and diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism work. We also bring organizations together in cohorts and then support those cohorts to work and learn in fellowship with one another to advance this critical work. And we do aggregate research across the entire field of education, in some ways also across the nonprofit sector. And that is some of what we're going to dive into today. We're here today to talk a little bit more deeply and explore some of the findings from our Unrealized Impact 2.0 report. For anyone unfamiliar, we released our first report in this series in 2017. And we're pretty proud of it. It was a report based on data from 5,000 individuals and 200 organizations across the field of education. And what we wanted to understand is, how is the ed sector doing on DEI? And the results were really sobering, and they showed that we had a really long way to go. This new 2.0 report that we just released last month includes data now from 28,000 individuals and 500 organizations. It's the largest study of its kind on DEI in the field of education. And I believe it presents a really bold call to action for orgs to engage in this incredibly important work of becoming diverse, inclusive, equitable, and anti-racism on the path to social justice more broadly. One of the ways that we analyze data and mine for insights is by studying what we call an organization's DEI profile. So we start by plotting organizations according to how their staff experience them along the lines of diversity. And on this page, what you're looking at is on the vertical axis, how organizations are experienced around diversity, and also inclusion. And we plot that on the horizontal axis. And what we see across the field is these really interesting patterns, one of which is probably really clear from a quick glance here, where each of those dots represents an organization, and we don't see equity, which is the color and shape of those dots. We don't see that moving to being experienced as high, indicated by purple triangles, until we look at organizations that are actually doing pretty well on both diversity and inclusion. One of the interesting first findings here is that idea that diversity is just not enough. We have to be thinking holistically about this work. And further, we study clusters. So we look at the organizations that are clustered on the bottom left and the upper left and the bottom right and the upper right, and we think, what's common? Are there common themes that we can learn from? Can we mine for insights and share those back out with leaders in the field to help inform practice? And what we find is that, in fact, there are tons of trends. And so we organize them into what we call DEI profiles. So there are these 4 DEI profiles, from early stage to diversified and kindred, with different characteristics around how diversity, equity, inclusion is experienced by their staff. And ultimately, what everyone wants to know is, we look at those advanced organizations on the upper right there. Folks want to know what works. And so we zoom in really deeply and we study what practices are more strongly correlated with representation in that upper right advanced DEI quartile. And that is the starting point for our conversation today. In Unrealized Impact 2.0, we shared 5 promising practices that resulted from this analysis of what practices are more highly correlated with that upper right advanced DEI profile. We're going to talk more about each one of these as we engage in conversation with our leaders here today, but here's the high-level preview of those 5 practices. First is that organizations that deeply integrate DEI as part of their ongoing work, moving past random acts of DEI, are much more likely to be advanced. The next is that organizations that diversify their entire leadership teams are more likely to be advanced. Organizations that enable authentic participation and input, sharing power through meaningful engagement, really thinking about who's at the table and how, are more likely to be advanced. Organizations that support the relationship and critical skill building that's really required to advance this work are more likely to be advanced, moving beyond icebreakers into deep and authentic relationships. And finally, organizations that are focused on equity-based outcomes, really infusing accountability for what truly matters, are more likely to be advanced. And so today we're going to explore those 5 promising practices. And to help us in that exploration, I am super thrilled to introduce our featured speakers today. So honored for you all to be joining us today. So first, Tina Fernandez is the founding CEO of Achieve Atlanta, whose vision is that Atlanta be a city where race and income no longer predict post-secondary success and upward mobility. Constance Jones is the CEO of Noble Network of Charter Schools. It's Illinois' largest charter school network with over 12,000 students, 1,400 staff across 18 campuses. Noble's class of 2020 graduated with 2,500 seniors, 97% of whom were accepted into college, while earning a record-breaking $500 million in scholarships. And Ann Eidelman leads Blue Engine, a nonprofit which works with teachers, schools, districts, and education organizations to optimize the power of team teaching so that teachers can create individualized learning experiences that meet the needs of every student. These folks are all CEOs of advanced DEI profile organizations doing their own deep and hard, messy work in this context. And each of them also has been deeply engaged in supporting this and serves as a member of our board. Tina and CJ have written blogs with us, have served on our advisory panel for this research and work. And so I couldn't be more honored and thrilled to have all three of you friends joining us. Thank you for doing so. And I wonder if we could start with each of you introducing yourselves in whatever way feels radically human to you. And CJ, maybe you can start.
Thank you, Ziamara. And it's so good to literally now see all of you. I appreciate you taking the time to be with us today to engage in this important discussion. Very hard work, but very critical to the work. So my name is CJ, and I love this question around radically human and what makes me radically human. And I've been thinking a lot about what fills my cup and my soul, particularly during these extremely hard times in education that I know a lot of us are experiencing today. And for me, that answer is music. Music saved my life when I was in middle school and throughout periods of high school. I went through a really tough time. And it was me being involved in singing that gave me a sense of belonging, validated who I was as a human being. And that continues today. So I love live music. I love singing in my praise group at my church. And I've been leaning on that, albeit very hard, throughout this pandemic to get me through so that I could have my cup and my soul filled to be there day in and day out to do this work on behalf of our kids and staff. So I look forward to this discussion, and thank you so much again for this question.
Anne, will you go next?
Sure, happy to. Like CJ said, I'm so happy to be part of this panel, so thank you for having me. I'm entering it both as a sort of a student. I think there's much to learn, and I come at this not as someone who knows the answers, but we're doing the work and really proud of where we are, but have so much more to do. So excited to learn from everybody on this call today. By way of introduction, I'm actually a fourth generation teacher. So the work I do in education is almost in my blood. My great grandparents all the way down to me have been teachers. With my grandparents actually on my mom's side were Holocaust survivors. And so that combo of experiences, the lesson I learned growing up was education is the one thing that can't be taken away from you. So it's been a deeply ingrained sort of mindset and approach to life. And then also really transparently, I credit school with actually saving my life. It was the place where I got to go and be seen and where I felt I belonged the most. And so for me, being both a student and a teacher has been a really sort of driving force, both of those sort of in balance with each other. By way of other parts of me, I'm the mom to an 11-year-old curly-haired kiddo. His name is Julian, and I always talk about him because while this work is super important to me, he is my North Star. He is my grounding force, and he is the reason I think I was put on this earth is to be his mom. I'm also a cisgendered, white, able-bodied female. And I also identify as a leader. I think part of sort of what drives me as a teacher is really what I think about a lot in leadership. And Alandria, who I see on the call, who I work closely with, we talk a lot about how you create and think about the conditions where adults can thrive in the same way that we think about those conditions for students to thrive. And so it's one of the reasons I love being part of Promise 54, because it's what really drives that question about making sure we're answering and asking the same question that we ask about students that we do for the grownups, because we're all humans at the end of the day who want to learn and be seen and get better and reach our potential is really critical to me. So again, so thrilled to be part of this panel, and thanks for having me.
Over to you, Tina.
First of all, just super excited to be here, and what an inspiration. And just want to say thank you to Promise 54 for doing this really important work and for elevating this really important conversation beyond, like you said, random acts of diversity, into like some really just like very real tactical ways that we can accomplish the vision that we all have. I thought this was a really interesting question, Siamara. I'm not going to lie, I struggled with it a little bit. Like, what is my radically human introduction? But it was good. And so I wrote down a few things that felt like, right now, this is who I am. First is, I'm a daughter of God. And I have been really sort of trying to internalize that idea that the divine lives in all of us, including in me, and trying to get really connected to that part of who I am. And then really trying to listen for what it is that my purpose is in life, and always seeking to figure out how to live out my purpose. And so that is really important in terms of who I am. Another thing that is right now very much a part of my identity and connected to that first part is that I am a very diligent student of self-compassion. I have, and we'll get into these conversations, but as a woman of color, as a Latina, as the first of in a long line of firsts, there's a lot of pressure to perform, and there's not a lot of self-compassion. And I'm nearing my 50th birthday, and I'm ready to kind of like give myself a break a little bit. And that is not an easy thing to do. So I've been really studying what it means to be compassionate with oneself and to love oneself. So that is also who I am. I'm a Latina. I also identify as a leader. And I am also right now really focused on connecting with other humans at that human level. So I love this idea about being radically human. And I'm a woman from the borderlands, grew up on the Texas-Mexican border. That's a big part of my identity. And then finally, I come from a long, long line of warrior women. And as I sort of hear their stories and their stories of struggle and how all of these women were the pillars of their families and communities, I'm sort of owning my place in that line. And that includes Indigenous women from the Americas who have been here all along, to wives of soldiers who fought in the American Revolution. And so I feel really honored to be a part of that line. And then my daughter Lucia carries that, next. She's 18 years old, and then Frankie is 20, my other love. So my two kids, mom is another big part of my identity. So I'm just really happy to be here, and thank you for the gift of that question, because it was really great to sort of think about those things.
Awesome. Thank you to all of you for the super generous introductions. Really appreciate it. Beautiful. And we could probably hang out right here, finding commonalities and connecting and having a really good conversation and enjoying. Tina, I appreciate your conjuring and centering of the warrior woman. My name Xiomara is originally Aztec, and its literal meaning is ready for battle. And I own that in so many ways, and find it to be, something that deeply helps me stay grounded and connected. And anyway, I'm sure there's lots of places we could connect just in relation to our radically human interests. Where I would like to start us, though, in relation to these promising practices, is this idea of moving past random acts of DEI, that orgs that deeply integrate DEI and anti-racism work into their ongoing work, into the fabric of their organizations, are more likely to be advanced. I think one of the ways in which this kind of plays out and can be tricky for folks is this idea of how do I DEI front and center in the face of competing priorities, right? And I'm often asked in my role, how do I do DEI front and center? And I've got all these other competing priorities for budget and time. And my answer is often some version of, well, when DEI is not one of the things that you do, but how you do everything, then you won't have this false binary or false construct. So I'm curious, what's your answer? What are your thoughts about how do you keep DEI and anti-racism deeply integrated within your organization? What does that look like for you all? And I wonder if you kick us off here.
Sure, happy to go. I think we used to be that organization that thought of DEI as like a parallel track. So just to honor our own journey, I think we are where we are over time in part, and shout out to Promise 54 for helping us. But I totally agree. It has to be, for us, we're in a place where DEI is the work. It's not separate from or informing. And so for us, I'll just give you examples of how it shows up in case that helps. But, you know, again, I'll hold probably throughout this whole conversation, this idea of how do you make choices that ensure equitable classrooms for students, but then do that same work and ask those same set of questions for the adults in the organization that's doing that work. So, you know, a couple of quick examples where, again, we are doing better at embedding this within the work is, you know, a couple of years ago, and Promise 54 did a case study on this, we changed what our intended impact is for students. So instead of measuring only college readiness, because it created warped incentives and had us focusing on bubble kids, we changed our intended outcome to measuring academic gains for all students. So that was a huge leap forward for us in bringing our equity value to what it means, you know, within classrooms. You know, there are other choices we've made on the program where we've changed our trainings and really focused on mindsets when we work with teachers, because we know the research says that, you know, teachers really have to be able to believe and have high expectations for students for the real change to happen. It's not just about pedagogy and instruction. And so have made sort of other choices, you know, on our program around that. But then another huge decision we made, and I'll talk about why I'm bringing this one up, is that right before the pandemic hit, we decided to close down our original program, which was bringing AmeriCorps volunteers into the classroom. Really critical work that we believe really deeply in, but we knew that as an organization, from an equity standpoint, we really wanted to focus on the existing classroom teachers, because for us, our equity value told us that the teachers who are in the classroom are already enough, and that there were systems and structures that were not enabling the human capital in the system to really reach their full potential. It was met with a lot of surprise by external stakeholders. It was considered a bold, courageous decision, and, you know, to really sort of sunset the model that many people associated with Blue Engine. But for us, when you looked at our bedrock, what we call our bedrock DEI value, it really told us that that was what we had to do and really make that strategic choice. And so those are just examples how it shows up, you know, and then within the org, you know, we'll talk about this, but it's included in our brand refresh, which Alandria on the call just overhauled, where equity is literally in the logo now that we do. It's included in everything we do on the staff and talent side. It's even informed sort of our revenue model and where we're thinking about how we get financing and revenue to run our organization. So I'll stop there, but just examples of how I think this work has to be embedded in literally everything you do. And again, there's more work for us to be doing here too.
And just a follow up, because that's a massive overhaul you just talked about in extreme cliff notes, a multi-year time frame. I know. I imagine that sort of massive overhaul could come with a lot of mixed responses or reviews or feelings from partners, funders, et cetera. I don't know. Can you speak a little bit to how that quote unquote bold set of actions to deeply center DEI and anti-racism work in your fabric of your organization was received? How y'all handled that?
Yeah, and what I'll answer as like an immediate response to that is one of the things I wished I had done better when we made those decisions, whether it was the intended outcome or the decision to sunset AmeriCorps, is do a better job explaining the rationale. I think at the time we thought we were doing enough, and because I don't think the sort of equity centeredness was as explicit or potentially as clear, it was met with incredible resistance. Why are you doing that? You're ruining Blue Engine. Blue Engine is about this. And so, you know, we lost funders over the intended outcome shift 6 years ago. We lost funders over the choice around the sunsetting of AmeriCorps. We have gained funders, but it has not come without incredible pain and change within our organization. And so, you know, I have this like toggle and grapple in my mind where it didn't feel as bold as it ended up landing on other people, because our equity value was so clear that it was like, once you bring that to the forefront when you're making decisions, it's actually not a hard decision. But I think the communication and how you sort of wrap and bring others into it is where we met a lot of pain and you know, a lot of pain and challenge. It was not easy. It's one thing to talk, it's another thing to walk.
Thank you, Anne. That's a morsel. CJ, I know that one of the ways in which to think about how to deeply embed this DEI and anti-racism work into the very fabric of the organization is to think really intentionally and critically about who's at the table, defining what that all looks like. I know y'all have been in that kind of intentional thinking and work. I wonder if you could speak to how has intentionality about thinking about who's at the table, how are you engaging, who are you engaging, how has that influenced your ability to center and integrate your DEI and anti-racism work, and has it allowed you to come to a sharper point around what your biggest focus areas are?
Sure, it's a great question. And let me just say, Anne, thank you for sharing your story and journey, because I think it's really important as we're going throughout these conversations that we know others are doing this work and experiencing some of the same challenges. I hear you. And so I just want to thank you for sharing that. So I'll address this from a couple places and a little context. When I first joined Noble in January of 2015, and this was 17 years into the organization's history, I was the first person of color, Black, brown, first person of color, period, to ever serve on the executive leadership team. And quite frankly, I was the only person of color and only woman on a team of white male chiefs. So there's that. I'm really proud to say that I became CEO in November 2018, and we worked really hard over the last few years. But my leadership team, over half are women and over half are people of color. It doesn't just like start and stop with the leadership team being diverse, but you gotta start there. It is critical to have people that reflect the experiences and perspectives of the people we serve at the highest levels of leadership. That's one thing. The second thing that I will highlight is that we had this priority and focus on DEI for many years, and there have been many pivotal moments throughout this journey, but one of them was when we went from focusing on DEI to actively becoming an anti-racist organization. And that really happened to us, quite frankly, after the murder of George Floyd, where I felt like there was even a higher calling and a higher responsibility, particularly given the kids we serve, to do better. And I'm really grateful she's on this call right now for our Chief Equity Officer, Jennifer Reed Davis, who really led the charge here with her expertise and her wisdom. Now I have to say, and we talked about this in the recent blog posts, it wasn't on her to figure this out for the organization. The biggest thing we did was get up in August of 2020 when we launched the school year, and we said our number one priority for everyone here, our 1,500 staff, is to dismantle racism at Noble. That is everyone's responsibility. And we even went so far to say, and there are no sacred cows, there are no sacred policies, there's no sacred practices. And so there are no sacred people. Like, we are truly going to dismantle and rebuild. So in that rebuilding process, we engaged thousands of people from the communities we serve. And that's what was really different as I think about the anti-racism process versus the processes and some of the successes we had with the DEI work, is we talked with thousands of students, parents, alumni. And Jennifer, our Chief Equity Officer, would say, it's not about giving you dinner, it's about asking you what's for dinner. What do you want for dinner? And then providing that for the people we serve. And it resulted in a variety of bold, courageous moves that, quite frankly, I don't know if we would have got to that point if we had not engaged thousands and thousands of people who we serve. So one of the things that we did, and as Anne mentioned, it's been hard, it's been a journey. There have been lots of challenges along the way, but we changed from having a uniform to having a school dress code. And that was something that was a collaborative effort with our students and with our parents. And we also had a demerit system since the beginning of our time as an organization. And we eliminated the demerit system and then went over to the Noble Community Pact, which focuses on restorative practices. It has been massive, massive change. I'm proud of the people I work with every day because it's been necessary change, but it's been really hard change. And we're still working out a lot of things, but in partnership, in community, with the thousands of students and families, alumni we serve, we've ended up in what I believe to be a better place, and over time will be an even better place as we work up through a lot of this.
Awesome. I kind of have chills over here, y'all, just hearing you talk about the journey and the work and the just deep investment and progress. Thank you for sharing it. And it sounds, what I love about how you're so generously sharing is that it's really real, you know, it sounds hard. And I think a lot of times it is really hard. So thank you for not sugarcoating that. I imagine and I see in lots of organizations that as you undergo this process that Anne, you talked about, and CJ, you talked about, and you're engaging lots of different people from different places within the systems that you're operating and working within the organization, the community, et cetera. One of the important things is making sure that you're operating in alignment with common beliefs, that you're rowing in the same direction, that you're defining terms with the same concepts in the same ways, to help kind of align the work across lots of different people. Tina, I wonder if you could share a little bit about if that's something that you all have grappled with, how you've undergone that work, and if so, what the impact of it has been on your overall journey.
Yeah. So I'll start by saying that it's never done. It's a continually evolving process. And I had the privilege of being the founding CEO for Achieve Atlanta, which meant that I had this incredible opportunity to build the type of organization that I wanted to be a part of. And that was key, right? And one of the things that I had always done throughout my professional career was code switch between my professional and my personal, right? There's the sort of like home person and then the professional person. I didn't want to have to do that at work. And so I really believe that with our team, we have an incredibly diverse team on all dimensions, age, gender, race, religion, just across, you know, geographical sort of origin. And one of the things I'm proudest of is building an organization where people can really be their authentic whole selves and bring all of that to bear. What happens though is that when you do have a really diverse organization, right, people use different terms, different language, different ideas. You know, if you're the child of an immigrant versus a, you know, 5th generation Georgian, you're going to have different experiences and different ideas. And so when we were first starting, we had a core, we defined our core values as an organization, and those really drove our work, and we embedded them in our staff meetings. We called them out when we were making decisions. They were very integral part of how we talked about things in our organization. But a year and a half ago, we went through another core values exercise, and we've only been around for 7 years. But we started to see that some of the ways that we were defining our values didn't necessarily fit where we were, especially during the COVID era. And we had to go through with the entire staff and like look at each one. Does this hold true still? What do we need to revise? What do we need to change? And that was a really useful exercise, because people evolve, organizations evolve, the times change. We're, you know, the era of racial reckoning and COVID, we are not in the same place we were 7 years ago. And so you have to constantly be thinking about the language that you're using. The other forcing factor is that the way we spoke to each other internally was very much the way I think family, right? And that's another big part of my identity as a Latina is, you know, family is very key to who I am. And we operate that way in our organization, which means sometimes it's the, you know, the hard conversations and the disagreements and the, you know, like sort of getting very real with each other, but there's an underlying layer of love and trust where we can have those conversations. But when we had to start talking externally, this is where we had to actually be very intentional about, like, you know, how we were going to present the family to the rest of the world, right? And one of the big conversations was around how we defined our students. And we have several Black team members, and we had this conversation around African-American versus Black and what was the term we were going to use. And people shared what their experiences were with the term, why it meant something to them. how they self-identified. And as an organization, we decided to use the term Black. And that was a decision for us based on who we are and the representation of the students that we serve, right? Same conversation with Latino, Latinx. I call myself a Latina, but I understand that the younger generation refers to themselves as Latinx, and I think both should be able to exist. And so we have, conversations around this on our social media platforms. On Juneteenth, what image are we going to post? Is it an affirming, uplifting image, or is it one that sort of, relies on these antiquated ideas, of what that holiday was about? Are we talking about Hispanic Heritage Month versus Latino Heritage Month versus Latinx? I mean, these are all intentional conversations that we have because we do know that language matters. And the trust that we have within our walls, we don't necessarily have outside. And so it's an ongoing dialogue. We talk about this all the time. We call out race in our vision. And when we decided to say race, where Atlanta is a city where race no longer predicts, like we were met with like, oh my God, that's so radical. And it did not seem radical to me to say that. But it was a big deal. And luckily, people embraced it. But, you just don't take anything for granted. But I also think there's a level of grace and humility and allowing ourselves to be human, where we're not policing each other, but we're actually like together creating a language that feels empowering for all of us. So that's how we've done it at our organization.
Thanks, Tina. So every single one of you spoke to some of the messiness and challenges and hard stuff, gnarly, hard, messy stuff that you've been working through. And Tina, you just spoke to what I suspect all three of you can probably relate to around this, needing to have some sort of underlying layer of, you called it love and trust earlier, Tina, then you called it grace and humility and humanity. I'm curious, within your organizations, and this, I bet any of you could probably speak to this, I wonder who would like to, how are you helping to support folks to build the kinds of relationships necessary, including the psychological safety and the trust, and having the skills to be able to engage in conversations with one another when they get hard? How are you building that sort of common skill, common trust, psychological safety to be able to continue engaging in this work when it gets really hard and messy?
Yeah, I'll just start. And, some of this we've heard over and over again, but it bears repeating, right? So as a leader, I have to model what I want to be the case in the organization, and vulnerability is key, right? So if I can be vulnerable about what I'm feeling, when things are not going well, with either my work or life, or I'm struggling, with COVID and what's happening, if I can share that with my team, then they feel comfortable to share it with me. Likewise, we really value dialogue in our organization. And even though I'm the CEO, people push back and we have these back and forths, but we sort of, there's always sort of like the goal is to find the right solution for students. And that's where bringing the values in, bringing the vision in to okay, we may be having a hard conversation, but the reason we're doing this is because we're trying to get to the right decision for students. And so I think modeling that across the organization, and when your senior leaders do it as well, then it really does kind of trickle down. And then people feel that they have a voice and that they can, that they can bring it to the table. But that vulnerability is key. And we've done PD around vulnerability with the entire organization, because we know that that's a core asset of being able to build trust in relationships.
Thanks. Does that resonate for others?
Yeah, I mean, it resonates with me. And I have to be honest with you, I've had a really hard time being vulnerable in certain ways throughout this pandemic, because there are moments where I'm like, I have a responsibility to lead over 12,500 kids and 1,500 staff members. And if you really knew how I was struggling right now But what's happening within this organization, what's happening within this city and this country, I mean, there were some days where I just would open my eyes in the morning and my heart would just start pounding, like without anything else happening. I was literally irate with what was happening in our country. And so my fear, to be honest, with being vulnerable is that if that bow broke, it was just going to be broken. And I was, then going to have to figure out how to piece myself back together again in order to do this work. So I have to admit that probably hasn't been my strength. And I know this is something that women of color feel tremendously, is that we have to be strong for everyone. And sometimes that includes like wearing a veil. And yes, vulnerability is absolutely important to building trust and relationships. But what I have to say, I've been really impressed with from my team is there has to be an intentional naming of the issue or the challenge. And I've seen them do that beautifully. When things aren't going well, they name it. And I could sit here and try and just, sugarcoat as much as I want. So they're like, sugarcoat as much as I want. They're like, no, like this is what's happening, CJ. Like we have to start from here in order to get to the best solution for kids. So it's a balance. And I'm again, grateful for the team that helps me to maintain that balance and push me to be vulnerable and to proceed with the naming at times where I feel like, how do I do this well? At the same time, I have to, to remain strong for those who are depending on me.
Thank you. Yeah, in case you're not seeing it in the chat, lots of appreciation for the naming of the need to model as leaders, but also the complexity and the nuance in this work and how very difficult it is, right? Like we need to engage in this work together, and it includes heading into some gnarly places and doing some really hard work together. But we also have to then create the conditions of psychological safety where people can do that. It's all very complex, and as leaders, sometimes that complexity is has its own flavor of nuance. Anne, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, no, just appreciate, CJ, what you said, and being vulnerable about how hard it is to be vulnerable, but in this group. But I think also one of the things that I think a lot about that's connected to this is just you have to make time and space for it. And I think one of the things I learned the really hard way a number of years ago when we didn't do this is that it is a total travesty to not take time and space for the relationships and making time and space for someone on your team to ask the questions, that you just said, CJ, because otherwise you end up in such a cycle of mistrust that you actually don't get the work done. And so if everything's about deadlines and milestones and outcomes, and you don't either push on those or make space as you're planning for those to have the conversations, you actually never actually get under the surface and make time and a place for the people to ask those questions. And so one of the things I always think is so important to say over and over again is that this work takes time, and it might mean that things are slower, but it's the work. And so I think we all have to shift our mindsets to make time and space for that, both for the relationships and the conversations that come out of them that lead to better work and more equitable outcomes.
And over that time period, how are you monitoring how it's going, what's working, what's not working? How are you holding folks accountable to leaning in, those especially folks who don't have historically marginalized identities, leaning in and sharing burden? What are you monitoring? How are you holding people accountable to helping to advance this work as a collective? I don't know, Anne, do you have thoughts on that one? Oh, CJ, I see you unmute. Maybe you do too.
Yeah, you want to go?
Oh, I'll be quick. So I'm in the thick of it now because last Monday, we administered a pulse survey to the various communities we serve. And like the big question headline was like, how are things going? And it was an optional survey that we got back from various people within our community. Thousands completed it. And Our team, the survey closed this past Monday. After this meeting, I'm going to meet with our principals, and they've already started poring over the data. And we have, a leadership team meeting about it next Tuesday to do this with our family results and our staff results. And so we have to ask people, we have to be very intentional about soliciting their feedback, even when it's hard, because this school year has certainly been the hardest I've ever seen for a variety of reasons. But that doesn't mean that we shy away from getting the feedback from the folks that we've committed to and are committed to every single day. And so and we're taking it seriously, as reviewing it as leadership teams and figuring out our next steps. It will literally be the driver for how we set our priorities over these next few months. And so that is certainly one way that we are going about trying to figure out how we're doing and how we can get better.
One thing I'm happy to share, and I think it's actually a great example of how, even though we're in advanced, there's so much more work for us to be doing, is we are literally in the middle of a conversation at Blue Engine about what does it mean to be a white ally, co-conspirator, fill in the blank with the language that frankly we are not aligned on yet, but are in the middle of trying to figure out. And so we just had a couple staff members who identifies people of color elevate that they feel like actually the burden is still on them to do the disrupting and to be really identifying moments of microaggressions within the organization or otherwise. And so we are doing that work right now to say, what does it mean to be a white team member at Blue Engine really committed to anti-racism work? What is it, the word we use? What does it look like? What is it going to take for us to get there? And so I can't answer this question and say, here's how we do it, because we're figuring that out right now through a set of really hard, but really important and productive conversations that we're having both within affinity groups and as an organization. So stay tuned, but it's part of the work. And interesting, connected to what Tina said, that while our organization is super aligned on values, there's still a lot we have to do to understand, what does it actually mean? What are the terms we use? What does it mean to be a white person versus a person of color, and decentering whiteness? And so that work is ongoing for us.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in and add, so plug for Promise 54, a couple of years ago, Promise 54 came and helped us do our talent philosophy and led our organization through several exercises where we had to think about, these questions for ourselves. And one of the things that came out of that was that in our performance reviews, we have some questions around, whether somebody understands their own position with regards to power and privilege and, reflects on that when making decisions, whether people are able to interrupt bias when they see it. And those are actually really hard things to sort of measure somebody's performance against. But the fact that they exist on the performance review amidst many other things that are important, I think definitely are a signal, but more importantly, they lead to conversations. So, when we have new staff members, it will be the conversation with the manager. So what does that actually mean to interrupt bias? And then you can have a real conversation about, okay, so remember when we were at the school district meeting last week and somebody said X, and, and that's really what it comes down to, because I think that you can have policies and practices and norms and definitions, et cetera, but it's really about just how do you walk in the world and how are you interacting with others? And how can we then take that and elevate it into our policies and practices? And one thing I will just say, from jump is that if you are in an organization dedicated to diversity and equity, but your personal life is not diverse, then there is a big disconnect there. There is something about that. This is part of what your identity needs to be, is that you are a person who knows people who are not like you, who has a broad circle of people who influence your life. And so I just think that, these are the kinds of things that we talk about and then have data to measure it in terms of how we act and how we comport ourselves at work. That's internal. Then external, the targets that we set for the students we serve are also really important. And so we have lots of conversations about what are the outcomes that we want. We're a college success organization, and we've made a decision that we don't want good outcomes for Black and brown kids. We want our students to have the same outcomes as every other student and on the same outcomes that we want for everyone. So this idea of closing gaps versus incremental, change is an ongoing conversation, but it matters because it says, what do we believe is possible for the students that we serve? And so we're very intentional also about the targets that we set for the students.
Thank you. I could stay there for a while, but I'm going to move us in the interest of making sure we hear a closing thought from each of you. This one is an ask for a parting gift. From me personally, I hope it resonates for others too, but it is certainly straight from my heart. Tina, you talked in your intro about self-compassion. I want to go right back there into self-compassion. I know it's very much on my mind right now. I am personally in my own flavor of what you described, CJ, of bone tired, needing some pretty immediate recovery time, and really kind of going through the process of navigating that complexity, my own version of it, and some of the vulnerability and sharing that with folks. So my question for each of you as a bit of a parting gift and personal request is how are you personally sustaining yourself? How are you building in recovery time as leaders so deeply engaged in this work? And what does self-compassion really look like for you? Tina, it sounds like you've been pretty deep in thinking about this for some time. I wonder if you might want to start.
Yeah, sure. So one is getting very real with myself about what are those negative beliefs that I carry around with me about myself, right? And this is deep work, right? This is about how you show up, who you are, the things that you're most worried about that people are going to say, think, believe about you are really the things that we're sort of walking around in terms of what we believe with ourselves. And then being really active in flipping that narrative for yourself and saying, I am smart. Just because I cry doesn't mean I'm not strong. And, actively nurturing yourself the way that you would nurture a friend or your child, or your staff, et cetera, is to kind of just confront those. And then also this radically human thing of connecting with other people's suffering. Suffering is part of the human experience. And so when we're tired, that is logical and reasonable, and that is okay. And there are lots of other people who are tired, and that belongs. So instead of trying to fight the thing that we think we shouldn't be feeling, is allowing it and nurturing it, and then thinking about, okay, so then in this moment that I'm tired, what do I need? And, and then allowing yourself the permission to give yourself that. We are really good at doing that for other people. We're not good at doing that for ourselves. And so it's, so right now what that looks like for me is meditating, exercising, walking instead of running, because today I don't feel like running. And so I'm going to give myself permission to walk instead. Just those kinds of kindnesses that you would give to other people is giving themselves to you. And that is not easy work, but it's really important.
Thanks, Tina. What about you, Anne?
Tina, I am so appreciating your response, because you don't often hear generally or on panels like this, the deep, true sort of inner work conversation. And thank you for inspiring me to share sort of my real truth too, which is I think there's something really important about this idea of self-worth and self-love that we don't talk enough about, that and I recognize there's both sort of our own work, and then there's a system around us that, depending on your identity, you're pushing against constantly, right? The world tells you something about yourself, but what's the work I can do to undo some of my own stuff that makes me feel not worthy, that has me showing up in a way at work where I can't show up for other people. And I think the more I have done that work, I have been able to be the kind of leader that I think is really trying to live out and striving and living out our values. So and that helps you sort of have some more wholeness in this really, really hard work. So Tina, thank you for starting that conversation. And then I'll just say a really tactical one, because I think it matters. I have learned that stepping away from the work, even during the day, to get space to process and be with myself, particularly in moments that are really challenging at our organization, has really helped me sustain and not go to empty. Like I used to go to empty and try to fill up a little, empty up and down. And I'm really trying to stay like, you know, as a working mom, you're like sort of middle, you know, of the container. And so gas wise, but like giving myself permission and modeling for others that my best thinking and I can show up best for this organization is if I step away and take a walk, do yoga, hang out with my kiddo, or just be by myself. And that has made an enormous difference.
Thanks, Anne. What about you, CJ?
Self-compassion for me during this time means embracing the idea that while happiness is awesome, and I love, love, love when people are happy, happiness cannot be the goal. Doing the right thing has to be the goal. Because I'm gonna tell you what, if you're really truly doing this work the way it needs to be done, you're gonna piss a whole bunch of people off, full stop. In a discussion, I even argue that you know you're doing the work well when people are mad as hell. So I just wanna like stamp that, because the things that people have said about me, I mean, it's ugly. And I'm talking about internally and externally. And it's compounded by the fact that I am a woman, that I am a proud Black woman, that I am a young Black CEO. I'm older than I look, but I've been blessed with really good genes, but I'm young. I mean, I'm blown away by like the things that leave people's mouths. And so I have to focus on doing the right thing. And it's complicated because growing up, there were things that happened in my childhood that resulted in me carrying around this trauma and this desire and longing to want to be liked by everybody. So focus on doing the right thing. Happiness is great. We love to make people happy. But in order to stay the course, you got to focus on doing the right thing. And that right thing comes from really, truly leaning in to what the people we serve are telling us we need to do.
Thank you. Thank you each for filling my cup with that last question, and for just engaging so honestly and vulnerably and really in this conversation together. Super appreciate it, and you joining us. I'm just say a couple quick closing notes. I want to appreciate those of you. I know some of you have been with us through many of the 9-part webinar series that we've been running for all of November. And so thank you for joining us. It's a wrap. This is our last webinar in this series. In a few weeks, though, we'll send out recordings from most of the webinars and a roundup of all the different resources that we shared related to the Unrealized Impact 2.0 release. So be on the lookout for that. And if you're not on our newsletter list, hop on there now so that you make sure to get that roundup newsletter coming in a couple of weeks. If you're in an organization that's looking for support to advance your anti-racism work, your DEI work, I hope you can check out our DEI Accelerator cohort. We're just accepting applications for a couple more weeks, so this is last call. There are amazing providers, lots of amazing providers out there. You don't need to go it alone. So reach out to us, reach out otherwise. We can connect you with other providers. You don't need to go this work alone. Get the help you need to advance the work. And last but not least, if you don't mind taking 60 seconds to give us just a little bit of feedback, we pour over that feedback and use it to inform our practice in these webinars and all of our work. So give us a little bit of a sense of your experience in this session today. And again, just thank you so much for joining us. It's been lovely to see you all and be in community together, and just appreciate the energy in the chat and the faces and the smiles and the nods, and all noticed, all appreciated. Thank you for joining. Have a good day.